Sus chords. Let's talk about them. I have several students now who are really interested in pop, rock, and jazz music. And they want to know how to play it, but they don't know how to make it sound good and feel good. One of my students actually said it best. I just want my playing to be prettier. So if you've ever said this might be a really cool video for you because it's going to go over a tool that you can use, whatever style of music that you play, to make your playing prettier. And that tool is called the sus chord, or sus tones. This tool is so huge, and you hear it in every form of music, from classical, jazz, pop, rock, country, every style of music it shows up. And if you understand it and a little bit of the history behind it, you'll be able to apply it in your writing and your playing to make your writing and your playing sound more colorful, interesting, and yes, prettier. So let's dive in and take a look at sus chords and tones. To understand the sus chord, we should first go back to its roots in classical music. Quick disclaimer before we move on. I made this video several months ago, and looking back now and editing it, I'm realizing that I approached the sus chord with a much more classical academic approach. I went to music school, and I was always pretty good at music theory. So that's my background. But if that's not your background, if you don't come from a more traditional music theory background, then the concepts and the way that I explain them coming up in this video are probably going to maybe be confusing, it may not make much sense, and it may seem that I am speaking in some alien language. Now, if that's the case, don't be alarmed. Leave a comment in the description. That's going to help me when I make my Part 2, Understanding Sus Chords Part 2 video, in which I will present more practical ways and exercises that you can work the sus chord into your playing no matter what style of music you play. In this video, if you stick around until the end, there will be a practical exercise on how you can use the sus chord tone in a sort of sequence over a 5/1 cadence. Now, what is a 5/1 cadence, you ask? Stick around, watch the video, you will probably find out what that is. You'll probably figure it out if you're an intuitive learner. Again, if none of this makes sense, don't worry, because I'm going to make a Understanding Sus Chords Part 2 video and break it down in a much less academic way. So stay tuned for that, leave me a comment. Another way that you can stay tuned for that video is to subscribe to this channel. And of course, if you get something out of it, share it with your friends, comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. So, all that out of the way, for you music theory nerds, and those of you who are willing to learn and willing to stick around and maybe intuitively pick up some music theory concepts along the way, if you don't already have those under your belt, stick around and watch the rest of this video right now. From classical composers like Bach to Beethoven to Wagner and beyond, the sus chord shows up all over the place. And sus comes from the term suspended, which describes how a tone in a chord is carried over or borrowed from a prior chord before resolving. And this technique was used by pretty much all classical composers, I would say most notably Bach. An exhaustive study of how this technique shows up in classical music is really beyond the scope of this video, but there's a really simple chord progression that sums it up. C over G, G7, C. This progression is itself a cadence, which can be thought of as a musical movement or gesture. It's already in a simplified form, but if we simplify it even further, the first two chords can be thought of as two parts of a 5/1 resolution, 5 being dominant and 1 being tonic. Now, if you're unfamiliar with terms like tonic and dominant, definitely check out some literature, maybe get a book on music theory, and there's tons of YouTube videos out there that will go into depth and explain these terms, as well as the Roman numeral system to understand basic chord functions. So this typically classical progression of C over G, also known as a second inversion C chord, followed by a G7 chord, can be thought of as a two-part five. In other words, a two-part sequence that is serving a dominant function. So now here we have a very basic version of the most traditional and perhaps commonly used suspended movement called the 4/3 resolution. Classical composers would take an inverted chord like this C over G, and they would treat G as the new bass note, making C the 4 in relation to G. The 3, or the third, is the strongest tone of any chord because it conveys the quality of the chord. It acts like a magnet to denote a half step above it, the 4th. So this is exactly what's going on in our C over G followed by G7 progression. The C wants to resolve down to B, which is the third of G. So we have 4/3, and that's our 4/3 resolution. Now that we understand a 4/3 resolution, we can begin to explore how the fourth can be suspended. So let's say we move toward our G7 chord, but instead of resolving the fourth, we take the top voice, E, and move it down a whole step to D. Now we have a tension between C and D, the fifth and the fourth, as the fourth is suspended before it resolves to the third of the next chord. And this is about as classic an example of a sus chord as it gets. So I'll play that again for you. So this is great because we can start to see how the fourth is actually suspended and what that means and how it shows up. What classical composers would then do is they would, once they've gone through that little two-chord sequence, they would then take the root note, G, or whatever the root note is, and move that down a whole step to the seventh. So now we have that dominant seventh tone there. And then that dominant seventh tone becomes the 4 of our one chord, our tonic, which is C in this case. Now, then suspend that fourth before resolving it to the third of the one. So here we're starting to see 4/3 or suspended sequences, which is suspended chords or motion happening one after the other. And that's something that Bach was incredible at, and it shows up in a multitude of ways, but this way is pretty cool because it's fairly easy for someone who's new to this concept to wrap your head around. I'll play it again. So C over G. We have the tension now, the 4 resolved to the third. We bring in the flat 7. Then we sustain or suspend that for the flat 7, which is now the 4th of our C chord, before resolving it to the third. So if you've made it through the first part of this video, congratulations. You now have some background, and you see how there can be a second inversion 1 chord followed by a 5/7 chord, and how we can borrow a tone from that second inversion 1 chord to make it the 4, and how that can be sustained and carried over into the 5 chord to form that suspended 4 sound. Thanks for watching. If this video got you even 1% closer to understanding sus chords, please share it with other nerd friends who will benefit from it. And of course, don't forget to like and comment. Your comments are really actually important to me because they offer feedback. If you don't understand what I'm teaching, or if there's a better way that I can convey this information to you so that you can understand it better, that is something I would love for you to put in the comments so I can know how to better tailor these videos to different people and different musicians with different backgrounds. Also, this is super important. Don't forget to click the link in the description, which will take you to a free worksheet that you can use to apply the sequence that I demonstrated earlier in the video of sus chords in a 5/1 cadence. You'll get that worksheet. It's free. You'll be able to take it through 6 different keys. And don't worry, if you're not a piano player or you don't read music, I have included guitar tabs. I will ask you for your email address. You're going to get updates every time I post another video tutorial. You're going to get exclusive deals because you are a part of the mailing list having to do with lessons, private lessons, updates on, if you're interested, you will get updates on my original music and all kinds of stuff like that. So there's a lot of value to be had in joining the email list. Do not worry, I promise I do not send a ton of emails. I think it's going to be a lot of value for you. Stay tuned for the next video. I'm going to make an Understanding Sus Chords Part 2 video. In that video, I will tailor that more for people who have less of a music notation reading background, less of a classical background, and more of a playing by ear background, people who don't read music. So if you don't read music and you didn't understand this video because it's more of geared in a more classical, traditional way, don't worry. The next video that I make on sus chords is probably going to be much more easy to follow for you. Stay tuned for that by subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Click the little bell so you get the notification so that when I do release that next video, you will get notified. And lastly, please stay in touch. Get in touch with me via one of the links in the description, the social media links. Send me a message. Give me feedback. If you're interested in a private lesson with me, I have spots available for new students, both online and in person if you live in the Austin, Texas area. Again, thank you so much for watching this video, and I really look forward to seeing you in the next video or even in an actual live lesson. Take care.